This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show, our first episode of 2025. Before I introduce my guest, Maggie, who you all know, but before I do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to S4. It'll be very quick. S4 25 is February 11th through 13th in Tampa. Tickets are still for sale. We sold ticket 1,000 about a week ago, so there'll be somewhere between 1,100 or 1,500 of the world's best in OT security and risk management there. So I highly encourage you to check it out. And I'll have another video that'll explain for the attendees the new venue, where to go, everything that's happening. So I won't belabor it here, but if you go to s4xevents.com, you can get all the details. And with that, Maggie, welcome back to the Unsolicited Response Show.
Yeah, happy 2025. It's fun getting to be the one to pop the cork on this year with you. So good stuff.
Well, we're going to jump around a little bit in these 40 minutes. I kind of want to start towards the present day. So Maggie
Okay.
Morganti is currently with a company called WorldPay.
Mhm.
And you were in the OT security world for 6 years or so. And
Yep.
now you've joined WorldPay as, I believe, what, a chief product officer? Or what's your exact title
Senior,
there?
yeah, my title's Senior Director for Product Security. I haven't quite made chief anything quite
Not
yet.
chief
So
anything yet, not the C yet. But so you joined WorldPay, and WorldPay is a financial payments company. It's not an OT company.
yep.
So we feel a bit jilted. And I guess my first question to you is, why did you decide to leave OT?
Yeah, so it short answer is kind of wanted a new challenge. uh, had done the OT thing for a while, loved it, still love it. I think that everyone in this space kind of jokes that it's the Hotel California. Like you can leave anytime you want technically, but you're never really gone. But really wanted to really stress test what I had learned in OT and see how it would line up in a different industry and had gotten this role, hadn't really gone looking for it. Nick Ritter, who, used to work in GE, I joke with folks that I feel like GE is like the West Point of product security, right? I mean, you've got Nick Ritter, you've got Megan Sanford, you've got Rob Caldwell, just a bunch of the kind of OG product security folks came out of there. And Nick Ritter, excuse me, is our CISO at WorldPay. And he had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, why don't you come do this for me?" And I had a lot of anxiety around it, around leaving OT, right? Because it's what you know. And the thing that he enticed me with that has been a little bit of a journey so far is he said in OT, because he left OT to go do this as well a few years back. And he said, in OT, you spend on the best day, you spend 30% of your time trying to convince everyone that the problem matters, and you get to spend 70% of your time working on the problem. If you're really, really lucky and you're working for a very mature company. And he said, come give me a few years in finance and you will realize how spoiled we are because everyone in finance understands exactly why it matters, right? Downtime immediately equals dollars and cents. And he said, you get to spend 98% of your time just working on the problem. Like the evangelism piece isn't really something that anyone expects you to solve for because it's a very known issue at that point. And so have been exploring sort of that culture change over, I guess, the past 4 months now. I will say he was not um, fabricating any of that.
No,
It
it's
so
it's
far has
definitely
been
true.
very true.
Yeah, I mean, I did in the 90s, I was in the financial world, actually in payments, payments
Mhm,
processing and that sort of thing,
mhm.
back end for FTPOST and that. So I'm sure
Okay.
a lot has changed, but even in the 90s, it was not only availability but also integrity. If you could
Yep.
not
Yep.
guarantee that the transactions were legitimate, hadn't been
Uh-huh.
altered, it was a huge problem, and everyone just understood that was required. So you weren't
Yep.
selling the need at all. Of course, they have their own challenges as well, with like
Yes.
any industry would. One thing though, I wonder is back when I had a consulting team,
Mhm.
I would occasionally lose people to other sectors. So, of course, sometimes they go from one OT company to another, and sometimes
Sure.
they needed to because they had done all they could at Digital Bond. Uh, but some of them left because they weren't challenged anymore by the industry. And this was more the technical people. And like, I just can't do another assessment where I'm telling someone that they need to patch these things, they need to change default credentials, they need to
Yeah.
segment their network. And the fun of seeing all these different sites was great in the first couple of years, but after a while, it's like, oh, I just, I'm there almost, it was part of it was a little bit of boredom, and part of it was fear of losing their technical chops. I think it's gotten better in the last decade. There are some more challenging positions. We're further along, especially in
Mhm.
in some of the more advanced companies that you've been with. But did you run into that at all, that you just got a little tired of the 101 stuff? That wasn't an issue with
No,
you?
no, and I would urge anyone who is facing that sort of I love OT, but like maybe I'm a little bored and maybe I want a challenge, like go find an OEM and you will wish you had remembered what board days were like. The OEM space was a ton of fun. I really loved it. It would not shock me if I end up back there someday, eventually, after I, sort of do my time out in finance, because it was really and truly a new problem every day with a new customer in a new industry and a new threat and a new third party. And I mean, it was I that was never a challenge that I felt like I would wake up and be like, oh, maybe I'm a little bored today. Right. Those days were
Okay.
very few and far between.
Well, that's
So
good. And I want to dig into a little bit of your experience working for OEMs, Schneider
Mhm.
Electric, Rockwell Automation. But let's jump all the way to the beginning of your career.
Oh,
Because I
okay.
didn't know this. I had to do a little research before I had you on, even though it's not your first time on the show. But I didn't realize your degree, that you had a Bachelor of Arts in Middle East History, not technical.
Yep. Yep.
And then you got a Master's in Science in Applied Intelligence,
Mhm.
which, more closely related to what we do here, but again, not technical.
Yep.
So when did you get your technical chops? I didn't, I didn't realize that this was not something that had been from the beginning, from Maggie 1.0.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we're going all the way back, I really thought that I wanted to like work a Middle East desk at DHS or CIA or somewhere,
Hmm.
right? That was kind of the dream, and that was, dating myself here, right? Like early 2000s, mid 2000s when I was in undergrad, and got my Arabic courses and all of that in,
Hmm.
and then went to grad school, right, to go get this intelligence degree. And when I was applying to grad school, had a really close family friend who was a principal architect for Northrop Grumman, principal software architect for Northrop Grumman, and had all the chops that goes along with that. And
Hmm.
he um, really changed my life. One day he sat me down and he said, "Listen, it's great that you've got this Arabic stuff. It's going to be somewhat useful. If you actually want to be useful, go learn cyber." And I had, tinkered, as everyone sort of my age does. And, I always try to strive to be useful. And I said, all right, like, what do I need to do to, go functionally learn cyber? And he essentially sent me home with the entire back of my car packed full of like CompTIA books and CEH books and, SANS books that he maybe totally wasn't supposed to give me, that were a few years old. And he said, just start working through it. Call me. Here are all the USBs with all the labs you'll ever need on them. And he really mentored me through a lot of that. And I got to grad school, and Mercyhurst, that was the first feeder school for civilian intelligence analysts, was just spinning up a sort of sister cybersecurity program that they let me kind of dual degree myself as a
Oh,
pilot
okay.
to, instead of taking things like money laundering or the counterterrorism electives, I took the cybersecurity and coding electives.
I see. Okay, that makes a little more sense. So then when you went to
Yeah,
Mandiant as an intern,
yeah,
it was a little bit of both. It was the cyber and the intel side. They probably really
yep,
appreciated that. Okay, that makes
yep.
sense. And then did you really pick it up at Oak Ridge National Labs? Is that when you got real serious in your tech?
No, yeah, I mean that was some of the tech really kind of took off there. I did a graduate internship for Mandiant that went way longer than it was supposed to,
Hmm.
because shout out to John Hallquist. I groveled him into letting me stay like 5 months longer than they had actually budgeted for me staying. But no, Mandiant was huge as far as actually getting eyes on like CTI technical.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't as much of the true OT technical, um like seeing what's in a plant type of stuff, right? But I mean, it was an absolute crash course in everything CTI, right? And then got to Oak Ridge and really started getting kind of hands-on with some of the grid stuff. Fun fact that not a lot of people know that also did deeply help this. When I was in high school, my dad worked for um, a subsidiary of Patterson, UTI, for a fracking company. And he really thought he was going to teach me the value of a college education. And so when I was 17, he said, in the summers, you're going to go work a frac crew. So you understand, which was a really questionable thing to do for a 17-year-old girl looking
Yeah, that's
back, because those are
safety indications too. Yeah.
colorful environments.
Yeah.
But had a pretty good idea from that, at least of like some of the um, mechanics behind like pressure pumping and stuff like
Hmm.
that. Because I'd kind of done field work like that hands on. And this is a long, winding answer, and I apologize for that. But it was sort of how I ended up in the ICS cyber, was like the first labs that like the CEH and all that has you do. And on the virtual machines are like Windows 7 and Windows XP boxes, right? 'Cause they're shot full of holes. They're Swiss
Hmm.
cheese. And I remember looking at it and going, huh, where have I seen this before? Like, and I called my dad and I was like, Dad, do like some of these things still run on these operating systems? Oh yeah. And I'm like, can I talk to your cyber guy? Oh yeah. And he, gave me their cyber guys, or their IT security guys email. And it was just sort of this like aha moment of these
Hmm.
things that I'd, kind of gotten to play with hands on, ran on all of this stuff that was, maybe not the most secure by default. There, I think we're 10 minutes in and I got a secure by default in, so we're doing good. Um, but yeah, so just kind of perfect storm of life, I guess, that led me to OT security.
Well, you talked about colorful environments
Yeah.
and also
Yeah.
I think the way you got into the field is interesting as well. And maybe that's because one thing I wanted to make sure I covered with you is the women in ICS security issue.
Mhm.
Um, and we'll talk about the dinner and all that.
Yeah.
But where are we today? I mean, I know where we are in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
We've got a real problem with numbers. It's not that strange. I looked up. I think even going to college now, it's partially a STEM women in STEM issue because
Mhm.
you've got it
Yeah.
was like 20% of the engineering students are women. A smaller number are computer science majors, like 15. So
Yeah.
if you say 12% in OT security are women, we're a little below, but we're not that far below. But
Yeah.
my question is more on the colorful environment, the acceptance and such. Where are we today if a woman comes into the field and with the right qualifications and
Mhm.
the sincere effort to want to do a good job,
Yeah.
is it still more difficult for them to get in? And then I guess second question, to move up.
Mhm. I, from my personal experience, I feel like in the ICS space, we are very lucky. Um, the general culture and sort of our subset of cybersecurity, I can't speak to sort of the rest of
Hmm.
IT cybersecurity, but this community in, both my own direct personal experience and also, sort of, sitting in the corner and watching how other people are
Hmm.
being, excuse me, interacted with. If you come here and you want to learn, you will get taught, right? And it is a very impassioned community about making sure that there is the next generation coming up who is going to be able to do this,
Hmm.
whether you are a female or not. I don't mean to rose-colored glasses it. There is definitely a numbers issue, right? And you're always going to have the bad apples who um,
Yeah, and
make things
that's
challenging.
yeah, and maybe
But
maybe the bad apples don't get called out as much in our industry as they would in finance, for example. Maybe
um,
finance 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, you could get away with some things that you can't get away with today. I wonder, to me, and it's always tough being a man because I can't experience it, but I see a lot of the consulting companies, the product vendors, the OEMs, the
mhm,
government. I think they're doing, as a rule, there's always exceptions, but as a rule, pretty good in
yeah.
terms of bringing people in. It's harder just to find the candidates, but bringing people in, getting them involved and such. My concern would be more on the asset owner side, where you're talking about out in a plant with more people that have been there for decades,
Mhm.
used to talking a certain way, used to people looking a certain way.
Yep.
Is that getting better? Because I have such a small sample size, it's hard for me to tell.
Yeah, and I think that that is a very astute observation. I think it is much easier for women who want to get into this space. I think it is much easier to come in through the door of an OEM or a vendor like a Mandiant or a Dragos or a Clarity, right? Those are pretty accepting spaces, right?
Hmm.
I do think on the asset owner side, um, just from the nature of the work, right? I mean, going back to some of my experience, those environments have a lot less awareness of um, professionalism isn't the right word, but just sort of um, employee to employee candor and vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I think that those areas would likely be more challenging for females to come in through that door. I mean, there's some that I think that, if I had a mentee sitting in front of me and they said, "Hey, I want to go take an internship at Duke Energy," for
Hmm.
instance, like, heck yeah, go for it. I think that
Yeah.
you'll probably have a great experience. But I team rope with one of the guys who runs the local water authority down here. And they're a little rough bunch, right? I mean, they're a ton of fun, but they are a different crew than the crew that you're gonna meet from like the CTI team from Dragos,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So,
But I've been in this a lot longer than you. I mean, I've been doing this since 2000, doing assessments and visiting with
mhm.
the asset owners. There has been massive progress in that
Yeah.
front. I mean, you would never run into a woman, almost never run into a woman when you do go out to a site in 2000, and now you do. And there are a number of companies I know that have made large improvements. Like you gave the Duke
Mhm.
Energy example. I could give you,
Mhm.
10 or 20 companies that I've been around the last couple of years that I'd say, oh yeah, I would send my daughter to
Yeah.
go intern in those places. But then there are some that it's like you say, it's not necessarily intentional. It's just rough and they haven't learned.
Yeah.
Occasionally intentional. I don't want to dismiss
E-
that sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's just really, really rough and not. sensitive
Y-
to who's in the room.
Yeah, and I think it's that, and I really want to make sure to sort of highlight that I mean, because I'm friends with a bunch of these guys, right? And I don't think it's an overt sexism, even really. It's more of I mean, this is how they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And it just maybe isn't the most comfortable environment all the time for um some women, right? I mean, I've met women who work in those spaces and they give it right back.
Well, and
Which
the
is
guys in those spaces
always
would do anything for those women, right?
yes, yes.
So okay.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of what you're expecting, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I'm sure there's men who would go into those environments and go like, "Oh, this isn't for me,"
yeah,
right? And so I think that it's feeling out any employer and figuring out, is this a good culture fit, right? And I think that, places who are maybe a little bit farther along the I don't know, corporate company culture journey are probably a little bit easier places to enter the door
yeah.
for, sort of junior and mid-level women in their career.
And then what about getting women into the space? Um, this is the thing, and I've tried to be as honest as I can with the Women in ICS Security program. We have not succeeded. We succeed if we give away 100 free tickets, but the
Yeah.
idea was then they would come back and you get more and more in there. And I would say our percentages are only up a couple of percent, except for when we give free tickets. So we're at about like 10, 11, 12% women typically
Yeah.
at
So
S4.
I think it's a few things. I think it's because I think from my experience, I feel like industry-wide it's gotten better, right? I mean the fact that we are already full for the women's dinner and we're still a month out, um, to me is really encouraging. And I think the industry as a whole, I feel like has gotten better. I feel like for conferences, sometimes I worry that it might not be fully representative because of who companies are sending and the types of
Hmm.
roles
Yeah.
that sometimes that mix is in, right? Like if you're sending consultants, but a lot of your female team is your CTI team, and a lot of the consulting team is male, right? Like pie chart for us might not always give like the full picture of industry, right? Depending
Mm-hmm.
on who companies send, right? I mean, for instance, my last employer, Rockwell Automation, I think we were half of our entire product security shop of like 40 people was women, but I don't think that they're sending anyone from that shop this year, right? And
Okay.
they're very technical teams,
Yeah.
but they're sending like some of our
Business
sales and
development.
consulting
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's that. I think as far as getting women into the space, um, this is something that I take very seriously as a hiring manager that I think that, and I get excited about this. I think we have an ability to beat the numbers in a way that traditional STEM roles don't, right? So I got into this space, I don't have a bachelor's of science degree in computer science, right? And that's not something that you can pull off in engineering, right? I can't
That's
decide
true.
tomorrow, hey, I want to go be an aerospace engineer, and someone's just going to hand me a stack of their old aerospace engineering books and say, yeah,
Hmm.
read these and then go apply for the job. Like that is absolutely not how those roles work. Like you need your bachelor's, you need your master's, you need your PE, right? And
Right.
so I think this space is really beautiful that you can pull people into sort of um, entry level roles or like first touch point of their career roles that might have non-traditional backgrounds. And if they're willing to learn, we can take someone who, perfect example, one of the girls that I just hired on my PCERT team was a psychology major, and she was a middle school teacher for like 6 years and decided she didn't want to do that anymore. Went to get her master's in cybersecurity, graduated top of her class. And I mean, she's got a GitHub repo that's better than most of the men candidates that had computer science degrees that
Hmm.
applied, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that I think that cyber is really cool that in that it sort of lets candidates who maybe didn't know this is what they wanted to do in undergrad still find their way in. And so I think that we're unique in that way, in that we aren't going to sort of be handcuffed to the undergrad pie chart of, who is graduating. I mean, because you look at engineering, if you're only graduating on average 20% women, that's kind of the most you can expect
Yeah,
in that industry, right? Because that's your pool. Whereas I think cybersecurity is just beautiful in that we can say, hey, you want to come learn this? Go get your certs, go get some training, go get some hands-on experience, you know, build up your GitHub repo, show me some samples of what you've done, and like we can plug you into an entry-level role and get you rolling. So I think that's very
makes
cool.
it makes sense. And I think one of the other things, so we talked about the raw numbers, the environment out
Hmm.
there. One of the other things, and this is what we kind of morphed to this year. We said, well, we're not finding ways to dramatically increase the numbers as a percentage at the event, but
Hmm.
maybe we can help some women with their careers.
Hmm.
So that's why we did the scholarship program this year, where
Yep.
we picked 10 women out of the 100 that applied, and the idea is just to really provide a career changing event for them.
Hmm.
So they have an
Yep.
ambassador. We're going to set up meetings with them to do a little bit like what you've done yourself, where you've got like Megan and Nick, and you've got
Hmm.
this whole group of people there to help guide you, help make you aware of opportunities. I'm sure when you're facing a
Yeah.
difficult thing, you have plenty of people you can call to help. So
Yeah.
we're doing that through for these 10 women, but I think your Women in ICS Security dinner is a bigger extension of that, where you're getting, how many women is it now that are going to be at the dinner? Is it 100, or what are you at?
Yeah, so we are at, we'd initially capped it at 75. We have a wait list that we are working with the restaurant to see if we can expand it from the um, not exceeding like the fire code, expand it up to 100. So
You're gonna have to push to some of the outside there up on the sixth floor. But so you've got
yeah.
this started informally a couple years ago,
Mhm.
where there was, I mean, I can think back to the days when there were two or three women, like in
Yep.
2013 or something. It was a very lonely time, and then we got into the hundreds, and then a couple years ago you had a dinner with the women, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this year now it's actually kind of a semi-formal event, right? You have a
Yeah. Yeah.
sponsor. It's in it's in the hotel.
Yeah,
It's
we've
a real
got
thing.
we've yeah, we've got I think five sponsors, which is pretty cool. And I'm super excited about it because I think that it speaks a lot to also how the culture within sort of the women is changing, at least from my perspective, right? I think that there was this time period that kind of lined up with when I was coming in the door that you still had some of this um friction with women who, and I don't disparage them for it. I understand where it comes from deeply, that they felt like, I had to work so hard to get here. I had to be twice as good. And so they would really kind of push back on new women and be like, no, you don't get to just come do this, right? Like you have to earn it the way that I did. Um, and I feel like, and I don't know why it changed, but I do feel like over the past 3 or 4 years that some of that energy is sort of shifted into, if you want to come do this, come here and we'll teach you, right? Like
Yeah,
we'll pull up a seat at the table for you. And the the women in the space have become a lot more excited about getting, this critical mass and welcoming other women in and helping them troubleshoot. And I think that that's been really life-changing for me because, you know, the first year that I was at S4, I don't think I had more than like a 15-minute conversation with more than like two females.
yeah.
And, now there's like quite the formidable gaggle of us. So,
Yes, yes, it's really something. And I think one of the things that we've always tried to do is put new people on stage. Now, you are a
Mhm.
problem for S4
I know,
because
I
you always come up with these. Now, not this year, you're going to be judging the my favorite metric, but for a couple of
Yep.
years in a row, I always would say we don't put the same speaker on year after year because we like to have new women, new men,
Mhm.
anyone new, introduce new faces who are doing good
Yeah.
work
Yep.
to the community. But you kept having work that I couldn't say no to year after year after year. So I think you were on stage 3 years in a row. But
Yep.
I think that's big to give people a spotlight so that they can grow their careers. Uh, One last thing on this, I really like, we're not doing it this. Your group has really kind of taken it over. We used to have a
Mhm.
social event on the first night on like Monday night, but now you
Mhm.
have a social event on Tuesday night. I like it being early in the event because you
Yep.
find I really saw this the first year we did it. You get these relationships formed at that social event, and then you just see them built over the next couple of days. So,
Yeah.
thank you for you and the team. I know it's not you. Is there anyone else you want to shout out that's kind of an organizer of this? So we give them credit.
Yeah, so Emma Stewart has been just a beast planning this. I don't know what I would do without her as a co-planner. And also the B-Sides group, the women in the B-Sides group,
Hmm.
like Kirsten Duranville and all of them have been planning the women's reception Monday night before S4 kicks
Right.
off. And we're all in a group chat, and it's really fun to, sort of be in there talking about, hey, isn't this super cool that, the year that S4 is, a somewhat abbreviated S4 this year, and there isn't like maybe some of the structured events that there used to be, we're still pulling off two back-to-back women's events,
Yeah.
for all of the newbies. And it's been amazing how quickly both of those events filled up. I know that Emma and I, had talked about when we were getting this thing actually formally underway this year about, hey, like we got 75 spots, maybe if we get to 50 and we still have
Oh
25
no.
left, we'll reach out, maybe we'll reach out to the local asset owners and see if they and that has not been a problem. So it's
No, I
uh
mean
it's fun.
it is one of the things you find with this community. I'll throw them under the bus a little bit. If you provide something fun and free, you will be full. You will be full. There's no
Yeah.
shortage of people that want to go to those things and spend all night. We used to see people stay out till like 3 in the morning at the Beer ISAC just because
Yep.
it was fun and free. Okay, well let's shift. I did want to get back to the OEM before we run out of time
Hmm.
here
Yeah.
because this is something I find fascinating. I have not I worked for a financial products OEM.
Hmm.
I was in your role
Yep.
for a company that made those types of systems. It's a little bit interesting because I see this. How do I want to preface this? Before in like the 2005 to 2015 time range, 2012, I think the OEMs deserved a lot of the blame because there were not things that could be purchased.
Hmm.
There were not patches being provided. There were not sometimes ways to change default passwords. There were, not secure protocols. There was nothing of this. And
Hmm.
then, 2013, 14, 15, and really by like 2018, some of the companies you work with, like I'm more familiar with Rockwell Automation's line,
Hmm.
had some security solutions.
Yep.
And if you wanted to deploy, let's say, an encrypted authenticated algorithm for your control protocols, you had SIP Secure as an option or SIP
Yep.
Security as an option.
Yep.
You could change default passwords. You could put in robust access control. When there was a problem with the PLC, new firmware was released to
Hmm.
patch it.
Yep.
As an OEM, what kind of uptake were you seeing from your customers on this?
Depends on the customer. SIP security was hard, right? Because I mean, there was a lot of
Yeah,
work that went
yeah.
into that, and getting customers to fully adopt it was challenging. Um, very few customers when I left a few months ago had still like fully adopted SIP security, but there was a lot of adoption of a lot of the other features, right? We had, you know, we had customers banging on our door like, "Hey, where's my patch?" Right? "Where's the patch for this?" A day after something came out, as they should. And it was really exciting for me because, back to sort of my early years when I was kind of getting into this, I would fight with my dad about, "Hey, you guys got to take care of this." And he'd be like, "Ah, who's going to target us?" And it's fun. It was fun at Rockwell having it come full circle and having that same company banging on my door, being like, "Where's my cybersecurity?" I'm like, man, I'm gonna win this Christmas dinner
Now,
fight
wait a
now.
minute, though. Wait a minute. Um, Way back when this was first coming out, I remember Eric Byers, when he
Hmm.
was doing his Tofinos, Tofino had a serious security issue. They issued a patch,
Yeah,
and they were, he knew it wasn't like Rockwell. He knew all his customers.
yeah.
It was a smaller group. He could actually reach out. He had the mailing list, and
Hmm.
hit him multiple times. Hey, you need to apply this patch. It's really important. And only 20% downloaded the patch.
Yeah.
And I watched your talk at Nexus at the Clarity event. And at
Hmm.
that time, you said, what was it?
Yeah, that was
6%.
that
6%
was
had downloaded or had applied the patch. So
that was for the comms module, yeah.
it doesn't sound like a lot of patching is going on, at least at layer one.
It depends. The comms module one was super fascinating, right? Because that was the one that we were able to kind of get the vendor A team together to push
Yeah.
rules before. And so, we've always sort of wondered, like, had we not done that, would the patch rate have been higher? And how much of this was them going, "Hey, you were able to sort of shift some of this risk for me, I'll catch it next quarter." And I don't have to have downtime because we have rules in place. We always kind of wondered that, but it was really encouraging to me when I was at Rockwell how many customers were really passionate about their cybersecurity, right? Can't name them because of NDAs, right?
Of
But
course.
a lot of customers, a lot of big customers were very, very passionate about wanting mature solutions. Um, and I thought that that was a very, those some of those meetings are hard to have, right? Because the customer wants you here, and we're working to get there. And
Are
you
these
know,
things
you
like, are these like security levels? They're saying we want to be, I or IEC 62443 level three, or
I
what kind of things were they?
I yeah, I wish it would have been that simple. It was, to genericize it, right?
Sure.
Um, some of it was how far back some of the support goes, kind of thing.
Oh,
Of like product life cycles of, those are hard conversations to have. And I think that I can talk about this because having worked at two of them and having friends who've worked at the others, I think it's very OEM agnostic of a problem that um, customers have this legacy system.
yeah.
And they really, in their heart of hearts, the evangelism has worked. They want to secure it now. Like we've got the Hearts and Minds campaign on lock. But then having that nuts and bolts conversation about marrying the evangelism that now they're very passionate about with the system they have, um, can be challenging conversations, right? About like how do we get you from here to here now that you're really on board with this. Um, and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. It's
challenging
just,
conversations, but it's heartening because they're yelling at you because they care. So
yeah, but I just almost think that the OEMs need to yell back a little bit. I put it in my Friday news and notes that Siemens announced that their PCS 7, they're trying to move people to their PCS Neo, and their PCS 7, they said, was going to be around, I think it was into the 2040s. And you're talking about something
yeah,
that's already decades old. And at some point, people have to move into the real world that I know they want to keep these things in line for or online for 3 or 4 decades, but it's just not the world. You can't say, I want this
Mhm.
advanced technology. And by the way, it's got to be advanced technology for 4 decades. Um,
Yeah, I do think that that's going to be a come to Jesus with industry at some point, right? And I think some of the SaaS offers are already
yeah,
solving for some
them.
of this.
Maybe it just goes away. Maybe this stuff all gets virtualized in SaaS and it just becomes cheaper and easier to do it. And that's the way we work ourselves out of this.
Yeah, and I don't know that it'll all become SaaS, right? I mean, you've worked in secure environments. Like there's environments that's just never going to work for, like
Oh, of course.
nuclear, right? But I do think that eventually, and I don't know that it's going to be the next 5 years or the next 10, but I think that there's just going to have to be a reckoning of, are we selling these products expecting them to last? Are we selling these products for X amount, expecting them truly to actually last decades? Or are we going to start shifting product models to, maybe we sell them for X amount, expecting that the turnover on them is going to be different, right? If I was only buying one iPhone every decade, they could charge me 5 grand for it probably. But, they're going to push me off my iPhone once every 2 to 3 years
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
If I really, really hang on to it, I might get five out of it. And so, the pricing model is different. And I'm going to be really interested to see if eventually we don't sort of get there a little bit with industrial, but it's super challenging too, right? Because the operational reality of switching out those devices on a more frequent time cadence, in some environments is also just completely not feasible. And so I do think that this is a space where I don't really have a lot of faith that we're ever going to fully get away from the problem, right? And this is where, I always kind of go back to, it was years ago, you did a podcast about, if I gave you $1, what would you go spend that dollar on to impact your security? And, if you really got to hang on to that, like L4 control logics PLC, because that's what your environment demands, right? You really can't change it. That might be okay if we can put the right controls around it. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Let's
we'll
dive
see. I
just a
don't know. The
little.
tea leaves are going to be interesting.
Let's dive just a little bit deeper into that because you said, and this will be the last thing.
Mhm.
Appreciate you taking the time this evening.
Yeah.
You said on your Nexus, you said it in this podcast, and you actually said it in your Nexus interviews. You were talking to the customers, and it says it helps
Mhm.
when you ask for it, and
Mhm.
that
Yes.
customer demand drives things.
Mhm.
So I've always thought, I said 2005 to 2015, I blamed vendors.
Mhm.
2015 to 2020, to me, it is kind of a wash. There's more evenly. But 2020 through this decade, to me, it's the asset owners. If we say the security posture isn't right, it's not the asset owners. And I've always wondered if I was the product manager for the logics line, control logics and
Yeah.
other lines, and the security person comes to me and says, hey, we need to be prepared for quantum. We need to have a second certificate option in our SIP security.
Mhm.
I might chase them out of the room. I might say, less than 2% of our customers are using SIP security. And I've got this huge feature list that, I've got, you know, maybe 30% of the top 10 manufacturers, three out of the top 10 manufacturers saying this is their number one priority. Where am I going to spend my development dollars, my support dollars, everything else, my marketing
Yeah.
dollars? How do you how do you deal with the fact that maybe the demand for security? I know you say it's increased, but if we look at the implementations, it's not really happening to the level you would expect based on the
Yeah.
huge buzz we see.
Yeah. And so I will say that reading the like 300-page PCI document was balm for my soul. Um, because I for as unpopular sometimes that standard is. Right. I sort of like had this feral moment where I was like, I want to print off the PCI document and force everyone in OT to read this. Because I think that finance with PCI does a very good job of like, this is the bar to ride. Like, this is how high you've got to be. And you've got to check all the boxes. And
Hmm.
it is a shared responsibility model, right? That, if you want to handle financial data, or, in our case, if you want to handle operational data, you've got to have your identity and access management figured out. You've got to have your encryption figured out. You've got to have your like the software suppliers
Hmm.
have to have their SDL. If I have third party components in my SDL, I have to show that I have allocated to make sure that they also are PCI compliant with all of their stuff, right? And I think that with industry, it's going to take regulation, right? I hate to be the one that begs for more government, but I think that that's how we get there. And I think that it is going to take harmonized regulation. I know that both at Rockwell and at Schneider, one of the big challenges is people are asking for it, but they're asking for it in six different ways. And we ended up spending so many resources just trying to figure out mapping all of the different government asks.
Yeah. Government and sector asks, right? So
Mhm.
I mean, you have the
Yeah.
European asks, the US asks, the sector asks,
Yep.
all that sort of thing. Wow.
Yeah. I think that if the different asks could ever really start creating some Rosetta Stoning, back to something like 62443, which I hope you're very proud that we've made it all the way through this. And I got almost to the end without plugging 62443. I think if we can start Rosetta Stoning as an industry back to something solid, like a standard, like a single standard that we can say, if you meet this, you can map it to all of these different things based on your leveling. I think that that's when you'll actually start to see some better, meaningful traction. Because to your point, I think there's been a lot of blame storming in industry and finger pointing about, the OEMs aren't giving this to us. And the OEMs are like, well, you're not asking for it. When I tell you it's going to cost more, you tell me, yeah, we're good. We're just going to stay with the insecure model,
Yeah.
which happens. And it's fine, right? Like it is what it is. And then government comes in and they're like, you guys aren't doing this on your own. And I think there's been a lot of finger pointing and not a lot of consolidation of how do we actually work together and do a shared responsibility of the risk in a way that isn't just passing it down the line, right? I think when I was leaving Rockwell, the newest person to blame was the integrator, right?
Well,
Um,
and sometimes that was warranted. Your companies like Rockwell would put out secure deployment guides, and the integrators would deploy it the same way they did the last 20
yeah.
systems they deployed. Well, it kind of takes us around full circle to where we started is in your new job,
Mhm.
you won't be having to convince them that they need these security features. So your new job is good. But I should just, if you didn't pick it up earlier, good news is Maggie did not escape clean. She is coming to S425, so you'll be able to see her there. And I'm sure she will not completely escape the industry.
No, no, I may have worked that into my employment that I
There
would
you
still
go.
like to be. I would still like to keep a finger on the pulse of what is going on in OT. So,
Well, Maggie, thank you very much for coming on the show, and look forward to seeing you in a month.
yeah, thank you. No, this has been a ton of fun, and I can't wait to see everyone at S4 here. And I think we're under a month, right?
Yep, yep.